Settlement with the FTC, a separate antitrust probe from the FTC, and yet another separate review now from the Justice Department, plus earnings. Got a new chief privacy officer. It's all in a week for Facebook these days. Joining us right now to break it all down is former Facebook executive Chris Kelly is joining us this morning, Facebook's former chief privacy officer. He was also the Giants' first legal counsel and represented Netscape in its antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft back in 2001, so he knows a thing or two about what is happening in Washington and what is happening in Silicon Valley, and it's great to see you, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Try to help us make sense of what's going on here. You know, when you saw the FTC settlement and then all of a sudden there's this new investigation literally back to back, I think a lot of heads, at least I know my own, were scratching saying, what? I don't understand what's going on here.
I think that you're seeing a real engagement on the part of the company to resolve a lot of disputes that are sitting out there. And then obviously they're going to have to continue engaging in the conversations with regulators across the world as they look to compete in different markets. So it's in many ways, when you kind of get this big and when you touch so many people's lives, it's inevitable that there's going to be some sort of look at the power that you have.
Sure, but there's two issues here. There's the privacy issue and maybe election engineering, maybe that's one issue, and I don't know if you bucket those together. And then there's the antitrust issue. And I wanted to ask you specifically about the antitrust issue because now there's news, the New York Times reporting that Chris Hughes, one of the co-founders of Facebook, is actually working with the government to try to help the government make a case effectively, or at least investigate Facebook over antitrust concerns. What do you make of that?
Well, look, as I've said before, it's a real stretch to get there. And you have to show that you have market power in a relevant antitrust market. And the vaguely defined social networking or, look, Facebook competes with T-Mobile and Sprint on some levels in connectivity and things like that. So defining the right antitrust market is the right thing. The reason that they're sort of reaching in this space is because they're looking for some way to talk about the power that social media is exerting and how it touches traditional media. I think that's an interesting conversation that the company is obviously going to have to engage in. But the idea that you have market power and that it's leveraged in some illegal way, at the end of the day, that's a case that has to be proven, and Chris, you got to get the market.
You know the people involved here, and you know the personalities. To me, it was one thing for Chris Hughes to write an op-ed and come out on this show and elsewhere and talk about his upset, if you will, with the company. It's quite another to effectively start working with the government to break up the baby, effectively, that you created. What do you think is going on inside the company?
Well, I mean, I think that obviously this is obviously a very kind of sexy media angle at the end of the day. But ultimately, a case has to be proven out. And I think that there are people within the company who are probably saying, well, we just have to pay attention to the law and pay attention to the facts. And the engagement level that they have had with the FTC around the privacy issue is probably a very positive thing, so that people can understand what these markets look like.
What do you make of the...
It's like Rat Fink. Come on.
What?
He was Mark Zuckerberg's roommate. Now he's a billionaire. Now he's going to the government and saying, hey, here's how you can break them up.
Look, I mean, people make their choices differently, and these things just happen sometimes.
Okay, so maybe it's a less traditional argument in terms of antitrust, and given your previous experience, what do you make of what's called the Standard Oil argument, which is to say that some of the acquisitions that Facebook made and some of the acquisitions that Standard Oil made effectively were meant to limit the marketplace, to limit competition. That really actually was the argument made successfully against Standard Oil back in the day.
Yeah, but oil is very different from human attention, which is it's limited at the end of the day, but you're competing for it all the time. You're competing for it with traditional media. You're competing with it with your telecommunications services. All these things, it's an analogy that doesn't work at the end of the day because of the relatively unlimited supply of what you're trying to get at.
Since I have you here, do you have a different view about third-party marketplaces, for example, on Amazon or on Google or even the App Store at Apple, given the Netscape Microsoft conversation?
Look, I think that there are things that companies that have market dominance in a space can do that are designed to limit competition. I mean, one of the key examples in the Microsoft situation was per processor licensing and all these things where the PC manufacturers had to pay even if they didn't load Microsoft Windows on as an operating system. Bringing those type of practices to an end. If somebody can point to what Google, Amazon, Facebook are doing in particular areas, and then engage on that, that's, I think, an interesting discussion to have. Unfortunately,
if the Department of Justice called you, Chris, though, and said, look, we're looking at these 4 companies, what do you think? What would you tell them?
I would say, look, the fact that that so much consumer attention is focused on these companies, and the fact that there are major economic markets is worth looking at. But the question is, you have to look at the conduct, and the antitrust laws are ultimately about the conduct of the companies. Having a monopoly is not illegal, and it's even hard to say that any of these companies are monopolies until you get to a particular market definition space. I mean, when I had other clients where you get ridiculously narrow market definitions in some cases that were proposed, and you explain to the FTC or the DOJ that, look, you can't look at it that way. There's close substitutes. There's all these other things that flow into. And the goal of the law is to protect competition, not competitors. And so what you often get is competitors coming in and saying, I want this piece of advantage in the marketplace. Do
you buy, from a privacy perspective, or maybe from a security perspective, the argument that one of the arguments that Facebook will make, as will Google, is, look, by being big, we actually have a better chance of thwarting untoward actors because we can invest in the security and all of the measures that need to be taken. If we were broken up in 3 or 4 pieces or whatever it would be, we wouldn't have the capital effectively to do that properly.
You have to run a profitable business in order to make sure that your platform is properly policed and cleaned. And that's one of the things, with this FTC fine, that's now $5 billion that Facebook is not spending on upgrading privacy controls and on looking at how to compete more effectively in the marketplace. And because that the company has gotten to a profitable place, they can absorb it.
But do you look at a Snap or a Twitter, which are clearly meaningfully smaller businesses but in the same space, and say that they are meaningfully less secure as a result of their size?
I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I don't think you have to be that sort of essentialist about it. But I think that you have to see competition on privacy and security too in the marketplace. And Facebook is certainly dedicated to that. I think Google's dedicated to that. I think Amazon, as they get more into advertising and obviously running the cloud services on a good chunk of the internet, they've got to be very, very concerned about this. And so it has to be a major source of investment and influence and innovation. And the question is, are we going to make sure that these companies continue to do that? And are you going to do it in a world where they're also competing with Tencent and Alibaba and Baidu and all these other, and Yandex, all these other players?
Finally, read the sort of political tea leaves, if you will. Right now, for reasons that seem almost inexplicable, this issue, these 4 companies, there seems to be sort of bipartisan support for at least investigating them, if not more. And one of the things that we've debated at this table is whether there really is bipartisan support or whether this is a little bit more of a, we're going to do this, we're going to show that, and perhaps more from on the Republican or the Trump administration side, whether this is a little bit more for show, a little bit more for to demonstrate that they're interested, but maybe not really do something in terms of enforcement, where clearly there are people like Elizabeth Warren on the Democratic side who really would like to break them up meaningfully.
Mm-hmm. In politics, different people do different things for different reasons. That's just kind of the way it goes. And some of it, of course, is posturing, and whether you're talking about sort of overblown allegations of conservative bias or anti-conservative bias, all sorts of different things that are going on. Then there are some people who are legitimately concerned about what privacy means in the digital age. What the companies are finding right now is that they have to be very engaged in this conversation. And I think that everybody stood up and taken notice in Silicon Valley about this, and I think that's a very healthy thing. I mean, I'm in Des Moines today. This will be a political conversation as we run around the state of Iowa. So,
okay, Chris, it's great to see you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
Say hi to the folks in Des Moines for us. You bet.
Excellent.